All right, so welcome to another interview in the You Are Enough Virtual Summit series. This is one of our bonus interviews. I didn't have enough space first time around, so I'm thrilled that today I'm in Berlin, Germany, and the beautiful Prema McKeever is in Vancouver, Canada. And what I love about this summit is I've connected with a few friends for interviews, and this gives me a wonderful excuse to connect with Prema. So a warm welcome to you, Prema.
Oh, so good to see you again, Pia Prana. Oh, good. Yes, good to see you, Prana.
Yeah, thank you. So, and I'm thrilled that you've said yes, because boy, do we have a treat for everyone listening today. So although it's been many years since I've seen you in the flesh, Prema, what I can promise all of you listening to this interview is that Prema comes with an enormous amount of wisdom and experience and knowledge, and when it comes to You Are Enough, what we discussed was that today Prema is going to talk about the inner critic, which I think probably all of us have this issue that we kind of I suppose struggle with at some point or another in our life. So before we go into that topic, I also just want to introduce everybody to Prema. Now Prema, come with over 20 years experience in working with acupuncture and Eastern I guess medicine and wisdom from the East, and you also work as a counselor with somatic experiencing. You focus a lot on trauma and trauma release. One of your modalities is biodynamic breath and trauma release, which is an amazing system. And one of our shared loves, of course, is this transformational process that we both facilitate called the Path of Love. And I'm just thrilled that we get to have this conversation together today.
Yeah, me too, Prana. I'm really looking forward to this.
And by the way, Prema will tell you where to find her at the end of the interview with her website and other things, because I certainly did not do justice to all of the wonderful things that you do offer. So just so you all know, there's lots more there to explore in on Prema's website, and we'll talk about that later. So I'd like to start, Prema, with my signature question, which is, what is your self-worth, personal self-worth story?
Mm. Yeah, I think I love the fact that you asked that question. I think we learn so much about ourselves from really inquiring into our story and also hearing the story of others. And for me, I had to think about this a little bit this morning. And what really popped out for me was the story that I've had in the struggle with defining myself in relationship to my father. There was always a struggle earlier in my life, up until early 30s, in fact, the sense that I had to somehow prove myself good enough, worthy of love, worthy of attention, to my father. And I don't know if he would agree with that. He probably wouldn't. But inside of me, it was so strong. And I remember the day actually where I was really struggling with this feeling like always was trying to be more of what my dad would want. Um and not to overshare too much, but my father's always struggled financially. Finances was not an area he was particularly fortunate in. And I realized one day that, wow, you know what? I am limiting myself in how much I make, how big I grow my business, how much I charge, everything. Because if I make more money than my father, I'm somehow a bad daughter. And when I realized that, it was like a ton of bricks hitting me. And I saw how much I was holding back my own potential and my own what value, really, what I was truly worth, because I didn't want to somehow compete too much with my father. And so in seeing that, the awareness, so much of it was able to dissolve right there. And then I did more work around my own value and worthiness, but really coming to see that I'm the one who has to value myself for what I am. Nobody else can give that to me. I can't get it from being better than or less than anyone else. It has to come internally from me, my own inherent sense of value.
Mm.
I hope that's helpful.
Well, you know, it's been interesting to speak to different speakers around this particular question. And what I appreciate more than anything is the fact that we all have to deal with challenges around self-worth in one shape or form, right? And of course, today we're going to talk about the inner critic, which is, you know, the one of the biggest culprits when it comes to self-worth, of course. So what I love is that by you sharing your story, it just kind of humanizes the fact that we struggle and we have things that are not easy for us, and hearing different people's stories, I think it just makes it easier to cope with our own. Like, it's not just Prana's story or Prema or whoever else, but it's like we all have these stories. So for
Yeah.
sure, it's super helpful. Now, Prema, I know that a lot of the work that you do is very much body centric, and getting back into this, having a relationship with the body, and also having a not just having a relationship, but also allowing the body to be a resource, be a way that we can feel better about ourselves. So I know that you mentioned that you wanted to take us through a process here. So I'd love to kind of just hand it over to you, and I will participate. And then of course our listeners can participate at the same time as well, but I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, and please, this is I'd like to start this way because especially when we're talking about the inner critic is here present right now. We all have one. I have one. It's a little chirping on my shoulder. You have one. Everyone who's listening to this, we all have an inner critic, even as we're listening to a talk here about how to possibly get freedom or get more space or freedom from our inner critic. So before we go into this in a deeper way, I'd really like to take a moment to resource us, everyone who's listening right now, and really bring
Maybe
in.
even before you go into the process, maybe you can also just explain what a resource is, because I think that that's very specific language. So maybe
Okay.
you can just help our listeners know what that is.
Yeah, a resource is anything that gives us a sense of comfort, a sense of, it could be a sense of strength, a sense of grounding. Resources can take many different shapes and forms. A resource can be a good friend. A resource can be your pet or a loved one. Um, a resource can be knowing your own strength or knowing your own capacity. Anything that, like I said, gives us a sense of capability, of I can, a sense of safety, a sense of comfort. Any
Mm.
of that can be a resource. And just like, you wouldn't go climb a mountain without having, some good boots and a warm jacket and a couple of walking sticks, probably. Those are resources for climbing a mountain. And so, as we're going to go in and start to explore the inner critic here, I like to bring in some resources, things that are healthy for us to have on board when exploring a difficult topic like this. And specifically, a really important resource is a sense of open-heartedness, of worthiness, compassion, acceptance. All those are really good resources to have when we're going to explore difficult things like the inner critic.
Mm.
So I'd like to invite you just to sit back in your chair, feel your feet on the floor for a moment. You can have your eyes open or closed, whatever works best for you. Yeah, just kind of get comfortable in your chair. And I'm speaking to our listeners as well right now, really give yourself this opportunity these next couple of minutes to explore this on the level of your body. Because the inner critic is not just a voice in our head. The inner critic is very much an emotional experience, and it's also a physical experience in our body. So let's just take a moment here and see if we can just drop in for a little bit deeper. And then I'd like to invite you to bring to mind a memory or a person or a pet or a time where you just felt more appreciated by someone, where you looked in somebody's face or their eyes and you saw how much they appreciated you, how much they loved you, how much they were happy to see you, how much that you're important to them, that you could see their value of you in their eyes. It could be, pets are wonderful for this. We come home and our dogs jump on us and they're so happy to see us. Or it could be a loved one, a good friend. Yeah. This is taking a moment to tune into a time where you had that experience that came from another person or another being. And then just notice what's that like in your body right now as you're imagining this person, seeing their eyes, seeing their smile. And importantly, the sense of being welcomed, being appreciated, being accepted, being met with an open heart, that can also come from ourselves. That can come from ourselves when we have a deep sense of accepting ourselves. It could be a time in your life, perhaps, where you had that feeling of, I'm enough. I'm enough as I am. I'm a human being. Sure, I make mistakes like other human beings, but I'm not trying to be bigger than I really am. I don't need to be 100% perfect all the time. I'll often do a good job, but like every other human being, I get to make mistakes from time to time. I know what my gifts are. I know what my limitations are. And I try to forgive myself, and just knowing that I'm okay as I am. So just having a sense in your body of what that feels like, whether it's coming from another person or from yourself. And just checking out. Sometimes people notice that their shoulders start to feel more relaxed, or their breath deepens a bit. That's what it's like when you feel that sense of acceptance. Acceptance both of yourself and also feeling welcomed by another. That open heartedness. So, as we kind of land here in this place, I'd now like to invite you to just feel the difference by gently just moving towards a time where you felt judgmental. Maybe your inner critic was a bit active and was hard on you. You know, um, maybe the critic was saying, in some way or another, you're not good enough. Maybe you're not smart enough. You're not thin enough. You're not young enough. You're not whatever it may be. You're not wealthy enough. You're not important enough. Just tuning in just for a moment, just notice briefly what happens in your body when you have that experience of that judge come in. It's oftentimes we start to feel tight inside, or our brain can feel a little freezy. It can feel like a little like I don't I feel kind of fuzzy or unclear. Notice what might change in your posture. Maybe your breath is a little bit tighter, or your stomach. Yeah, so we're just going to touch into that for a moment. And now I'd like you to, again, shift back to your person, your resource, your memory. Again, that friend or that pet, that loved one, or your own sense of self compassion for yourself, your own sense of being open hearted and kind towards yourself. So this is something that can be really helpful, like when we notice a little bit of those inner critic attacks, to shift back to this resources place of knowing, wait a second here. I am good enough just as I am. I don't have to be perfect. In fact, nobody ever can be perfect. I am a fallible, flawed human being, just like every other person on the planet. Just taking another deep breath into your body. And I invite you just to open your eyes when you're ready.
Oh, I'm so touched. When you started, I've never had a pet, but I've loved a friend's pet for a long time. And when you said pet, I immediately went to her, and I've got tears in my eyes just thinking about this. I so expanded into this like love for this little tiny little dog. It was like, oh,
Yes,
I was,
yes.
and then the moment I started thinking about a sort of critic, inner critic attack, I could just feel that expansion just go
Mhm.
contraction. It was very, very physical.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. That was very beautiful. And I think just like introducing our listeners to resourcing yourself is such an important tool to have, because especially these days when we're so much in social isolation, all this stuff, and we might not have access to the kind of um, stimulus or even support from the outside. Like, for example, here in Germany, we've now it's been limited to one person can visit you in your home.
Mhm.
So just knowing that actually you can just do a little meditation like you just did, and connect to your resources is
Yeah.
so important. Wow. Thank you.
Yes, and it's our brains in a way are built to always look at what's wrong or what's not here. In a way, it's a protective mechanism. It makes a lot of sense if you think evolutionarily speaking. We really do need to be on high alert for any danger or what's missing at any time. So we oftentimes don't have this awareness of our resources. And having that and developing that is such an important piece. It really, like you said, can help expand us and fill us out and give us a sense of, wow, I'm not this lone individual here floating on this planet in the middle of the universe, that I'm actually interconnected with all these beings and events and people. And it's really quite beautiful. For
Yeah.
sure.
So when we now, after all that loveliness, at least for me, we're going to delve now more into the inner critic. So you've already touched a little bit about how or why we even develop an inner critic. You
Mhm.
touched a little bit about how we're hardwired to look out for the negative, but perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more about the development of our inner critic.
Yeah, I think this is really important to understand because even though we all have one, it is so important to work with the inner critic to have an awareness of why and where it came from. So, in essence, the inner critic developed when we were children, usually around the age of 4, 5, 6 years old. And its goal, its whole job basically is to make us safe and lovable. At that age, the child, when we're children, we're starting to move out more from just having this one-on-one relationship with mom. We start to interact with dad more. Some of us go to preschool or kindergarten. We start to expand outwards, and we are learning very rapidly what are the rules in our particular environment for being lovable. What gets us approval and what gets us in trouble. And so the critic forms as a sort of way to keep us acting in a way that is valued in our environment. And that can be different from person to person. It's not just your parents, it could be what was valued by your older siblings, extended family that you were close to. If you grew up in an environment where religion was important, what were the messages that were given to you from your religious community? teachers, early teachers? What were the values that were put? You could say put on you or imparted to you in the school system. So the critic is there to take these rules and get us to act in a way that we will be valued, and it keeps us from doing things or acting in ways that might be disapproved of in the system, or feelings that were not approved of in our early life.
Mhm.
And so, like I said, we all have one. For some of us, it's more of an intense critic. It could be quite strong, even debilitating, stopping us from doing many things in life. And for others of us, it might be more subtle or tricky. And of course, as we start working with the inner critic, it often goes from being more obvious, more loud, and over time becoming more and more subtle. And we can talk about that more in a little bit. I think it's an important piece. But I think the main thing is that the critic has this desire really to protect us from pain. It's attempting to avoid feeling afraid, from having us being judged by other people. It will judge us first as a way to keep us from experiencing the intense pain of being judged by others, or being ridiculed, or feeling unloved or unsafe. And I think a really helpful way to understand what some of the triggers for each of ours inner critic is to look at, what parts of you did your family really enjoy and value? Did your parents and family really like it when you were, easygoing or smart? A really common one. Did your family really like it when you were self-reliant, that you could really take care of yourself, that you didn't really need other people there doing stuff for you? Was that kind of the message in your family? Or did your family really like it when you were kind of happy, or strong, or tough? So these are all the things that the inner critic will then shape us to be acting in the world, like to keep us going in that direction. And along with that inquiry, what did your family really value, is also the question of what was not welcomed in your family, of course. What sorts of things were maybe sadness, or um, being vulnerable maybe wasn't welcomed in your family. Definitely, like, oftentimes, obviously, anger. What family really likes their 5-year-old to be angry and to be expressing their anger? So we can have a huge inner critic against anger. Or maybe even things like your family didn't like it when you were too energetic, too expressive. You were just this kind of sparkly 5-year-old, and the family really wanted you to be kind of quiet and easygoing.
Mm.
And so all these messages that we were taking in as children get formed into our inner critic. And it's there. It's like we put on a jacket when we were 5 years old that was there to keep us warm and protected and loved. And now here we are, 40 some years later, and we're still wearing that same jacket when we were 5 years old.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, and like when I listen to you speak, like it's almost like many of them are like ticking all the boxes of the examples that you shared. But for me, it was definitely, like being a good girl, being very agreeable and nice and smiling and not being too loud and not speaking up or saying anything against anybody. It was and and I suppose, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but I suppose, like, even sort of historically, like we have always lived in communities, be it, a few hundred years ago, um, small villages, and of course, or if it's just now, it's the family unit. But a big part, of course, is that we don't want to be excluded from the community, from the family unit.
yeah, yeah,
So we're
you bet.
taking our cues. I'm hearing also we're kind of taking our cues from what's being said is okay, and what's then being said that this is not so okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think what you're touching into there is part of the socialization process of us as children. I mean, we do need to be taught, don't hit your sibling. Don't take somebody else's food. There is that aspect of it.
Mm,
Where it becomes problematic is we take on certain rules, like particularly like you just said, always be nice, always be pleasing to others. And then we take that and then we can develop this sense in ourselves that it's not okay to speak up, that it's
mm,
not okay, even when we feel like we're being somehow impinged upon, that we feel like we're being mistreated, that we're not being treated fairly. Maybe it's at work and we deserve a raise, but we're not getting a raise from our boss. And so then we have this inner critic saying, oh, it's just keep being nice and keep going along, and eventually you'll get there, and don't speak up for yourself. That's when it becomes problematic. It's like these rules in a lot of ways were helpful when we were 5,
mm.
but we've outgrown them.
Yeah.
We have our adult intelligence now. So we didn't have that then. So there is this process where we need to really go through this and get awareness of how some of these messages, which were fine then, are no longer helpful now. It's like we need a software update in a way.
Mm. And I don't know, I just know for myself the pain of the inner critic. Like you said earlier, some people have stronger, more intense inner voices, and some perhaps a little bit less. But no matter where you are on that spectrum, it's still incredibly painful.
Yes. And
And
that's important because we
mm,
have to be willing. One of the ways to work with the critic is we have to feel that pain.
mm,
And one of the things that keeps the critic kind of hidden is when we don't feel the pain. It's like this thing, we avoid pain.
mm,
And that's fine. It's fine to avoid pain. Like you don't want to stick your hand in a fire, that's fine. But when you avoid emotional pain, that just leaves us to being stuck in our life.
mm,
So part of working with the critic is we have to be willing to feel what's actually there and to be
mm,
aware of what's actually there. It's not even that easy to become aware of it. So for so many of us, that, like for me, one of the ways that my critic still shows up a lot is I'll notice that there's something I want to do. Like I have it on my to-do list. I'm a huge list person. And it's something I'm actually excited about, but maybe it's a bit risky for me. Like maybe it's about, I want to record a particular video for YouTube, or I want to put something on Facebook. It almost always has to do with what other people might think. And so I'll have this on my list, and a week goes by and I didn't do it. And then another week goes by and I didn't do it. And then another week goes by and I didn't do it. And so then when I really tuned in, I realized, okay, you know what? My inner critic is there's a lot of fear in my system. And I
yeah.
didn't even realize it at first. It turned into procrastination.
Oh my God. It's like your name here is Prana and not Prema, because in this way we're very alike. And in
Yeah.
fact, before we started this interview, I was writing an email
Mm.
to my database, and I've been procrastinating so long. I should have done it, maybe a week ago or something, which to me is a painfully long time, and I know this is something that's needed. And what I notice when I then finally get out of the procrastination and just kind of, okay, I'm going to do it now. I'm not centered. I'm not calm. I'm not grounded. I'm not, my wisdom is somewhere else. And the process then of doing something that isn't actually that complicated for me, then because actually becomes a painful process, because I've let it go too long in my procrastination. And it all comes from the inner critic of wanting everything to be just right and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Underneath perfectionism, and you and I actually are so similar in so many ways. Underneath that whole thing of needing to get it right is a huge inner critic. And
Mm,
we may not hear it as a voice, so we don't recognize it as an inner critic, but it shows up a lot as like a body tension, or
mhm,
this feeling of it's not perfect, it's not good enough.
yeah.
Or it can show up for us sometimes kind of like as a spacey dizziness, like I can't quite get the words together, I feel like I'm in a fog, like you were just saying, it didn't come from your center. All of those are the cues that we need to learn, that okay, you know what, it's time to get curious here and turn inwards.
Mm.
Could there be some inner critic going on here? I'm not saying it definitely is, but I think at that point, it's always what I do for myself personally is I get curious. Okay, is something inside of me worried about something? Is there a concern I have here? In my family, it's like my mother was this big, huge figure, and she had a very loud voice. And really, the message of my family is my mom gets to have the loud voice. I have to kind of be quiet and more of a peacemaker. And so, whenever it is that I want to do or say something that's going to go out into the public that I feel, ooh, might get criticized or whatever, there's a huge shutdown that happens inside of me. And I have to work through it and work through it and work through it every single time.
But what, you know, what I loved about what you just said is like to get curious, to
Mhm.
get curious and without kind of getting some sort of absolute, no, everything's fine, or absolute, oh, I'm such a loser on the other side of the, because I've got these thoughts. It's just, okay, let's take a moment and just feel in or wonder what this might be. And it's, there's something very soft and tender about being curious rather than needing things to be a specific way, or needing it to be, have an absolute answer.
Yeah.
When I don't think with this, there's nothing very absolute. It, and just to be curious, I think it's just a way to be softer with ourselves, when actually the critic is nothing, is the other, is the opposite of soft.
Yeah, the critic is more black and white. This is okay, this is not okay. The critic is not particularly curious. It has the world figured out into
Mm,
what's okay and what's not. And so, yes, one of the first steps that we have to step into when wanting to really work with the critic is we have to start to recognize we need to increase our self-awareness of it.
mm,
So it's really important to learn how to recognize the many different ways that our critic comes about. And, we've just been discussing a whole bunch of them. It can show up like as chest pain, or oftentimes as kind of a bad feeling in our stomach, feelings of worthlessness. That's a huge sign. Feelings that we're not enough, that we're not worthy. Those are huge signs that the critic is active.
mm,
And so this, by just becoming more aware of it, we start to already be able to separate from it. Because it's the more we become aware of it, we become aware, okay, there's actually something happening inside of me. It's not that I'm unworthy. There's more like, okay, there's something in me that's feeling unworthy. Because
mm,
that's the other thing. First, we need to identify the critic, and then we need to disengage from it.
mm.
Because for most of us, definitely when we're not aware of it happening, we're fused. It's like us and the critic are one. What do you mean, inner critic voice? That's my voice. That's my belief system.
What
But no,
voice? What are you
yeah,
talking about, that one?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to disidentify. So until we can become aware of that critic, we can't separate from it. So the first step is becoming aware. The second step is we need to separate. And
Mm,
that's where there's all sorts, different types of group work is really helpful for that. The path of love work that you and I are both involved in is very much about separating from that inner critic and teaching the skills to do that. Starting to get distance. That's also in trauma work. One of the things we need to do often is get distance from the trauma. The critic oftentimes comes about from relational trauma. There
mm,
was a certain level of not being safely held in our early family that often leads the formation,
mm,
particularly of the toxic inner critics, the really strong ones
mm,
that tend to shut us down into a state where we can go really foggy, really freezy, immobilized, depressed. Depression can be a part of that.
mm,
And so getting a safe distance from that critic, learning to disengage. And for some of us, that means working with a therapist or attending groups that really work to heal that relational rupture. It's not something that's just going to happen like this. It actually, I think, is one of the most important pieces of work we can do, particularly as women, is to
mm,
really root out that inner critic and work with all those messages, because it keeps us oftentimes in a very disempowered place, even though it's really just trying to make us safe and lovable.
mm. I mean, I'd like to just go back a little bit, because one thing we didn't we didn't go into more detail about is going in and feeling. You know, the healing is in the feeling of what's there. And in my experience over so many years, you know, either with clients or just with people in general, is that's not, you know, it's like you have a choice. So what did you do this weekend? You know, I watched Netflix and I went to a soccer game and then, you know, whatever. And then, oh no, I went to a group and I cried my eyes out and I bashed a pillow. And, you know, it's, most people are going to go for the Netflix and the, because it can, that delving into something like this is can feel so scary. And then just like the fear of the pain can often be too much even to go there. So I'd love for you, maybe, I didn't ask you this earlier, but I think it's important also just to perhaps normalize, almost, maybe, I'm not sure if that's the right word I'm looking for, but just giving a voice to the fact that we were given these feelings for a reason. Like we sadness, anger, rage, all those things are there because it's actually a natural part of the human journey. And yet so many people are afraid to go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Well, if we go back to just knowing that our critic is there to keep us safe and lovable, we learned pretty quickly what types of feelings were safe to go into and which ones weren't. And yes, the
Mm.
critic is also there to keep us inside a very safe, valued. I mean, I'll call it a box. I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche. We've talked about living in the box or getting outside the box for years. But yeah, the critic is going to tell us, oh no, no, there's going to be the sense of, oh no, I don't want to disrupt that. If I
Mm.
do that, something bad is going to happen. And it can be very much happening not at this conscious level where we're actually hearing those words. It's just more of a feeling inside of us. Yeah. No, don't get too big. If you get too big and powerful, something bad is going to happen. Like just when I talked about the very beginning, if I make more money than my father, if I get too big, you know, money is a sign of power in the society. If I get too powerful, am I going to lose my father's love? If I get too big, what will my dad think of me?
Mm.
That was running at a completely subconscious level. I had no clue, but I was very much sabotaging myself in so many ways prior to that. So there's so much is the feeling of the critic inside is, don't get too big, too different, too much.
Mm.
Because I almost all of us, I mean, even if we had fantastic parents, our parents didn't want us for their own safe, for their own sanity and comfort. How big did they really want their 5 or 6 year old thinking that they were? Very few parents can
Mm.
really support the bigness and the energy and the aliveness and the creativity of their child in that level. It's like, no, we want you to be kind of like this. So you fit into the family system. And if you're too much outside the family system, there's going to be a problem. So
Mm.
systems always try to keep themselves in a balanced state. And so parents are bigger than children.
Mm.
Those are one of the ways that the system tries to keep itself in balance. So we learned our position at an early age.
Yeah.
But again, we're no longer that 6 year old.
Mm.
You know,
And so
that,
that's actually the like coming back to what you said about separating from let's call it the 5-year-old, um where the 5-year-old needs to be safe versus now the 45-year-olds, that let's just say, to separate from that.
yeah, to separate from that critical voice, learn to distance ourselves, learn that that's actually not me. That's a part of me that's afraid of something, even though it may sound big and scary and blah, blah, blah. That's a part of me that's actually worried or fearful that if I do this, I'm going to somehow be criticized or shamed or attacked or excluded, or I'm going to get in trouble in some way or another.
Yeah.
So it is, we have to learn to distance from that voice. And then for some people, a path of finding compassion works. For other people, being more direct, telling the voice, you know what, get out for now, get out.
Mm.
And then just seeing what happens. What happens inside when you do distance from that voice? If you can feel that all of a sudden, you feel a little bit lighter, or you feel a little clearer in your head, or you feel like you have more of your energy back, then you were able to successfully distance from that voice.
Yeah.
If it's still there, then you know that you're actually are still fused with that voice, that it hasn't, you haven't been. So you have to, part of the work, part of the skill set is developing skills to be able to successfully distance ourselves from that voice. And
Mm.
that's a piece of work. Mhm.
And it's interesting because a lot of clients that I've worked with over the years, the issues that they deal with is not having healthy boundaries
Mhm.
and not having a voice.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like now hearing what you're sharing about the critic, it just fits right in there, right? Because we learned, for example, little girls should be or little kids dash little girls should be seen and not heard. So suddenly we're like, well,
Mhm.
we're not speaking up.
Mhm.
Or if we were to have spoken up as a little child, that of course isn't, that's where we're also learned that part of a parent's job, of course, I'm not a parent, so I'm really not speaking from experience, but of course, part of a parent's job is to make decent human beings of their children. So like you said earlier, you've got to stop the child from putting their hand on a hot stove or something like that. But speaking back, of course, is of course not something that is very welcome in the family, right? From a 5 or 6 year old.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so how it's going to look for everyone is so different, but very commonly, yes, if we feel like we can't really speak up, that's a big inner critic is in there somewhere. We were oftentimes in those cases, made fun of by our families often, or maybe what we had to say wasn't as important. Oftentimes, maybe we were like the younger sibling, and the older siblings were the ones who were listened to. It can be a whole wide range
Hmm.
of situations, but almost always in a case like that, it's important, like I said, to, like we've been talking about, get curious, turn towards it.
Hmm.
Because the critic is also that fear, the natural instinct when we feel afraid is to run away. That's the impulse of fear. Every emotion has an impulse. And so fear sends us to avoiding. Curiosity, we turn towards and we meet it. And it's not just we just,
Oh.
we do have to disengage from the critic, but first we have to turn towards, we have to meet it. We have to separate ourselves from it. We have to recognize that that voice is not us. It's a part of us. It's a part of us, and it will never go away. But it's more about making it be a part of us, transforming its relationship inside of us. So it's no longer this big voice of this whole system we grew up in, and it becomes more of a working part within us with all in balance with all the other parts. We
Hmm.
never get rid of our critic, but
Hmm.
we do have to learn to recognize when it's coming up at inappropriate times and at times where we're actually not in danger. And also recognize, what? We are adults now. Maybe I do speak up. Maybe I do post something and it gets criticized and it gets ridiculed or whatever happens. Oh, I can actually survive that now. It
Hmm.
was devastating when I was younger to be criticized like that. And while it doesn't feel great now, it doesn't feel great. But we have the resources, we have the capacity that it's going to suck, it's going to hurt, and we can get through it and grow from it, even most likely.
I love that distinction what you made between, like curiosity, you're being pulled towards it, and of course with pain or fear, fear rather, of course you don't want to go there. You want to run right the opposite direction.
Mhm.
I'm aware that we're coming to the end of our time together, and I just wonder, is you've talked about getting curious. That's an easy thing for people to do at home, and of course the beautiful guided process that you took us through to get familiar with our resources is another great tool that you've given us. Is do you have another little nugget, that something simple perhaps that our listeners could just do at home to support their journey to move away or befriend the inner critic and get more curious?
Mhm. Well, a simple tool to befriend the critic would be to get curious, and then to, I think, very helpful to put a hand on the chest or a hand on your belly or both, and just ask yourself, is something in me worried? And
Mm,
then listen. What
mm,
is the worry? And then, but listening with a quality of almost like you're listening to a small child,
mm,
not listening as in, this is the absolute truth and this is what's going to happen to me right now. And these are all the reasons why I shouldn't do something. But listen like you're listening to a child who's in pain, and just listen and listen and listen. And then when it's done, just take a deep breath. And if there's a way to let that child know, okay, I'm here now. You may even at times need to give a little bit of an update, like let the child know where you are now, recognizing that you're now a full adult, some of your successes in life, what you've accomplished, what you've done, who your friends are, your family, your loved ones, kind of updating it and remembering your resources, bringing possibly even those resources that we talked about earlier to that child. So that's a little bit of inner child work, but really, because the critic did come so much out of a relational injury, the critic came out of a whole family system. It's most effective to work with the inner critic with other people, because it came out of our relationship with other people, and by working with other people we're able to heal and transform it much more rapidly. So in the end, I would very much recommend group work for the inner critic or working one-on-one with a therapist. But in person at home, yes, putting a hand here and just turning towards and listening, listening for the concern and the worry. That's a self-compassion.
mm.
Mhm.
And I just love that we can have something that simple for now, for especially those who might not have a therapist at the moment, and just, okay, this is the start, and
Mhm.
listening and befriending it, and perhaps then either finding some insight, or at least just finding that, oh, maybe it's not so bad, or maybe it's not so scary when I feel in, right? Just those baby steps, for example.
And
So
the important piece is listening that you are the adult and it is the child.
mm,
That's already a bit of a disengagement.
mm,
You're not no longer fused. You're listening from these two different, because the reality is we are the adults now.
mm,
Yeah. So
yeah.
listen to it from that perspective. Yeah.
Beautiful. So Prema, our time is up, and of course, many of our listeners are going to want to go, where can they find you? And you do one-on-one work. You're a teacher. You're a facilitator of not just Path of Love, but also biodynamic breath and trauma release, which is an amazing tool as well. But where can people find you to maybe have updates on your work or contact you?
Sure. Yeah. My website is the fastest way to see what groups I have coming up. That is sacredinquiry.com. And I also have a YouTube channel, Sacred Inquiry. And there's videos of me leading breathwork sessions, also videos I have there about building resilience, and more videos about trauma healing and education. I really love teaching. So you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube that are meant to educate and also give us some tools to start healing aspects of our nervous system and our body, mind, and spirit.
Beautiful. And of course, your name is right there. So when people are watching this video, it's like, oh, that's easy to know how to spell your name as well. But not, yeah, spell it. Um, you were right. At the beginning of this interview, you said, oh no, it was maybe before we started recording, but you said, we could talk about the inner critic for hours, which of course we can. And even just like bringing in the inner child work, that's so incredibly important. So I'm sure many of our listeners are going to want to look you up and contact you as well. So, but for now, I just want to thank you so much for taking this time and allowing our listeners to get a sense of all the amazing wisdom that you have, but also real time, just tips that they can use immediately. So I just thank you from the bottom of my heart. And yeah,
Thank you.
I wish we could have done a few more hours.
Maybe some other time. But no, thank you, Prana. Thank you so much for all your work and bringing all the work that you're bringing out into the world. I mean, yeah, the talk we've just done and everything you've been doing with the summit. It's just beautiful what you're creating. So I really appreciate you and the edge, the risks that you're taking in doing this work. This is not easy.
No,
This is not easy. So I,
like
I,
you
I,
said
I
about,
bow to you.
putting yourself out there, and then of course you're just opening to criticism
Yeah.
or opinions, right?
Yes.
And that's a meditation in itself, right? To the moment you're putting yourself out, let's say you put another video up on YouTube, it opens up to all sorts. Yeah, so it's a meditation, and it's also a I suppose the like you and I, having done so much personal and inner work over the last, I can speak for myself, 20 years, probably the same with you, prepares us one step at a time to then be more in the public eye. And I suppose even if you're somebody listening who's not necessarily looking to be in the public eye, but just wanting to function better in relating at work, it always comes back to, of course, doing your work, doing your inner work. And if that is today just getting curious, that's the first step, like Prema just said, then that's the first step. So thank you, Prema, and for everybody else listening, I'll see you in the next interview. Bye for now. And now I have